All right, so we've already taken a look at what if they give you a graph and ask you to describe it or a set of data. In this video, we're going to look at what if they ask you to compare two graphs or compare two sets of data. So if you're asked to compare two quantitative graphs, you should address the four areas we normally address when we describe graphs and talk about all four parts of CUS. The big key and the thing to watch out for, and the place that they always warn about people miss points or lose credit on the AP exam, is make sure you use words that actually make a comparison. So you should be talking about things like higher than, lower than, greater than, less than. You can also say things are the same as or similar to, but we want to avoid just stating a bunch of facts. So for example, this is not a comparison. It is not a comparison to say dataset A has a center near 35 or 32, while dataset B has a center near 40. That's not a comparison. That's just two independent facts, it appears. Instead, a proper comparison would be dataset A has a center near 32, which is lower than dataset B, which has a center near 40. Or, that's, so if there's a difference, so it's easier to see lower than, greater than, that kind of terminology, you could also say dataset A and dataset D have roughly the same center near 51. Saying they're the same is another way to compare. So I just want to show you one quick example. This is actually a type of graph, or another twist on stem plots you can make. We aren't going to really spend much time making them. You wouldn't have to on the AP exam. The most likely scenario would be, if you saw them at all, would be where they give it to you and you have to talk about them. The thing you have to be careful about is they're both using the same stems. So this is all 80s. These are all 80s. But what happens is if you turn the graph on its side, now this isn't quite right. Normally the number line, we should have lower numbers on the left and bigger numbers on the right, and you just need to be careful about that if you were to, when you're talking about this left side of it for Class A here. But if we wanted to describe, or if we wanted to, compare these two stem plots, we want to hit the four parts of CUS. First, I would say the center for Class B is 98, or the center for Class B of 98 is higher than the center for Class A of 76. So I mentioned that Class B's center was higher, but I still gave both values. I think that's the best, strongest answer, where you say which is higher or lower, but then also give the actual values. As far as how I found them, I just put them in the calculator. You could also count your way to the exact middle point too. Next, Class A and Class B have the same shape. Both are skewed toward the higher values. Now I did this way because exactly of what I was talking about with these numbers. This visually looks skew left, but it's not skew left. Because if we were going to make this properly, these should be flipped over to this side with the higher numbers on the right. So with these kind of graphs specifically, and you could do this in general, instead of saying skew right or skew left, you could just say skewed toward higher values. Then that covers your bases. For Class B, when we turn it on its side, now the lower numbers are on the left and the higher numbers on the right. So we're fine calling that skew right. But the Class A one, because it's kind of flipped around because it's on the other side, this is actually skew right data. Skew right means it's skewed toward higher values. So that's probably the biggest thing to watch out for, specifically for these back-to-back stem plots. Next, the overall spread of A has a range of 42. So I got that by taking 110 minus 68. Which is smaller than the overall spread of B, which is a range of 60, 146 minus 86. And then last but not least, the data for Class A has no outliers. Class B appears to have one mild high outlier at 146. This is the one area where you're laying, you almost can just list it as facts. You could say that Class A has fewer outliers. Really, we just need to address the outliers. The center, the spread, and the shape, those ones we want to talk about being higher, lower, greater than, less than, the same, or different shapes. But when we talk about outliers, you could say, I guess, that the data for A has no outliers, which is less than Class B, which has an outlier at 146. But for the unusual features, you can just describe them. That's the idea with these. Just to make sure you watch that language and make sure you address all four parts of CUS when you compare.